In this lesson, we're going to start the process of deploying the Task Manager application to production. Now, this was originally going to be a single video, and I actually filmed it, but it got a bit complex and a bit long, so I'm redoing it, breaking it up into 2 lessons. In this lesson, the goal is to get a production-ready MongoDB database, and in the next lesson, we'll actually set everything up on Heroku to get our application deployed and working with that new database. But as mentioned, step number 1 is to get a production-ready database in place. Right now, the only database we have is the one running locally on our machine, and that's not going to work for when we deploy our application to Heroku. We want to use a MongoDB hosting service to get a database up and running that our Heroku app can connect to. Now, there are dozens of different companies and services that offer MongoDB database hosting, and the MongoDB organization, they actually have their own solution called Atlas, and that's what we're going to be using for this class. So let's get started by heading over to the browser, and we're going to work through all of this together because getting it set up for the very first time can be a little tricky, and I don't want to leave you hanging with the setup process. So over here in the browser, we're going to Google MongoDB Atlas. This is going to bring us to the MongoDB Atlas homepage, and it should look something like this. That's mongodb.com/cloud/Atlas. Now, once again, there are plenty of different solutions we could have gone with. I'm using this one because it's created by the MongoDB organization, so everything is always nice and up to date, and they have a generous free tier, so we can get started for free forever, and then upgrade when we have a lot of users and it actually makes sense. Right here, we're going to go ahead and get started for free by clicking Start for Free, and that'll bring us down to a sign-up form down below. Now, as mentioned, the setup process can be a bit tricky, so we'll go ahead and work through everything together, starting by just registering for an account. Right here, let's go ahead and get that done. I'll pick a password. And then we're going to go ahead and agree to the terms of service, and we'll click Get Started for free. Now, once again, no need to provide anything like a credit card to get started. You can get started just by creating an account. We can go ahead and close the little welcome screen and actually dive into the configuration. Now, by default, all of the options picked are going to allow us to stay on that free tier, though we could easily customize things to move into a paid plan. So we want to be a bit careful when navigating this page, making sure we always see free down below. Now, you'll notice terminology related to creating a cluster as opposed to creating a database. A cluster is nothing more than a MongoDB database with multiple servers, which can allow you to have a nice low latency around the globe. So if we scroll down, we can pick options such as the cloud provider. We'll stick with AWS. Down below that, we have our regions, so we can choose our primary region, and currently only 4 actually support the free tier. So you can pick the closest free tier region to you. For me, North Virginia is pretty close. Down below, we have more things we can customize about the tier, additional settings, and the name. We're going to leave all of those at their default value. We are on what's known as the M0 plan, and that is the free database plan, which comes with half a gig of storage, which will be plenty for us as we test and build out our app. Then in the future, we could always upgrade as we start to get paid users. So down here, we're going to create this cluster. Now, the actual process of creating the cluster does take some time. You're going to be redirected over to your dashboard page, where you're hit with a lot of information all at once. They have a little checklist of things you need to do in order to connect to your database for the very first time. We can just go ahead and minimize that for the moment. And in the background, our sandbox instance, our free tier instance, this is being created as we speak. Now, this can actually take between 7 and 10 minutes. So what we're going to do is just cut the video. I'm going to wait until the cluster is created and this connect button is enabled. Take some time to wait for that, and when you're done, just come back and click play. All right, we're back. So our instance has been created, and we now have some graphs to keep track of statistics about the database. Now, currently, there are no connections, there are no operations, and there's no storage. So these graphs aren't particularly useful, but these will start to change as we actually connect, read and write, and store data. Now on the left-hand side, in order to get started, what we need to do is click this connect button. This is going to walk us through a little one-time setup for this particular cluster. So right here, we're seeing a warning. You cannot connect yet. Set up a firewall access and user security permissions below. So we just have to work through this page. It's really short. Then we'll be ready to actually connect to the database, both from a GUI and from Visual Studio Code in our project. So right here, let's go ahead and add a different IP address, and we're going to provide the following. That's 0.0.0.0/0. This is going to whitelist all IPs. That's going to be our IP for your local network, and that's also going to allow this database to be connected from via Heroku, because Heroku is going to change that IP over time, and we want to make sure we can always connect. When it comes to security, don't worry, we will have a username and password as well, which we'll be configuring down below. So with this in place for the IP address, we can go ahead and click Add IP Address, which is going to add it, and we can see we've completed one of those steps over here. The next thing to do is to create a database user. This is someone who can connect to the database, and we're going to go ahead and pick something that makes sense for us. I'll go ahead and say task app as my username, then I'll also go ahead and provide a password. When you provide the password, take a moment to write it down or remember it, as this is going to become important in a couple of seconds. You can always use the Atlas interface to get the password you set later on, but we don't want to have to go back and forth between all the windows. So right here, we're creating the first user for the database, which will have access. We're going to go ahead and click Create MongoDB User, and that's going to be it for this page. The next thing we can do is actually connect to the database. And right here, if we continue on to the next step in our little 3-step wizard, it is choose a connection method, and we have 3 options available. Connecting from the terminal, connecting from our application, or connecting from what's called MongoDB Compass. MongoDB Compass is MongoDB's official GUI tool. So it's similar to Robo3T, though it's released and maintained by the MongoDB organization itself. Now we're actually going to take a quick moment to switch over to MongoDB Compass, as Robo3T currently cannot connect to MongoDB Atlas databases, which is obviously a problem for us. Hopefully they address that in the future, but for the moment we'll just switch to this other GUI. It's also free, available for all operating systems, and we can get started right away just as easily as we were able to with Robo3T, and they do the exact same thing. It allows us to see and manage our data. Right here, I'm going to go ahead and grab the download for my operating system. That's going to start the installation process, well, more like the download process, and once it's downloaded, we're going to take a quick moment to set it up, connecting to those 2 databases. 1, to our localhost database, and then 2, to our MongoDB Atlas database. Now down below, it's showing us to the connection string options we have available. We are going to go ahead and use this first one, that is Compass 1.12 or later. And down below, we have the connection string, which we will eventually copy to the clipboard. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go ahead and just get MongoDB Compass set up. Now, like with all software programs, the installation process will be different depending on what OS you're running on. For me, on a Mac, I just need to take the application and drag it over to the applications directory. From there, I'm going to open the applications directory, and we're actually going to boot the program up. So I'll scroll down to M for MongoDB, and the program is called MongoDB Compass Community. So the Community Edition is their free edition that we'll be able to access right now. I'm going to go ahead and crack that open, and we'll take a quick moment to connect to our localhost database first. Right here, it's asking me if I do want to run this software from the internet. Of course I do. And then we're going to be brought to the MongoDB Compass Community application. Now, right here, we have a quick license agreement to agree to, and then we'll be brought to a quick wizard. We can close that down as we'll work through the setup process together. We can choose if we want to send those statistics and crash reports. I always do. And now we are at the connection screen. Now by default, all of the information here, all of those default values, they're going to allow us to connect to the localhost database. It's already localhost on port 27017. So down below, we actually don't need to fill or change any of these fields. All I'm going to do is pick a favorite name for this one, and I will choose localhost MongoDB database. I'm going to create that as a favorite so I can easily connect to it from right here. Then we'll go ahead and click connect to our localhost database. Right here, we have the Task Manager API, we have our tasks and users collections, and we could crack those open to see the data exactly like we would be able to in Robo3T. So right here, I have the documents. I can also view them in a table view. And once again, I can manipulate the data, insert new documents, search the documents, and do anything else I'd want to. Now that this is working, let's go ahead and connect to the production database as well. So up above, what I'm going to do is go to connect, and then I will disconnect from the localhost database. That brings us back to the connection screen, and we're going to go ahead and create a new connection over here in the sidebar. Now we do have to fill out all of these details, and the information we'll be using is information that's stored in that connection string over in the browser. So this contains the data we need. Now it does not contain the password, but we can go ahead and get started. What I'm going to start with is just grabbing this right here, the host. That is what's after the @ all the way up to mongodb.net. I'm going to copy that to the clipboard. I'm going to head back over to MongoDB Compass and paste it in right up top. Now, when it comes to the port, we do want to go ahead and stick with the standard port, and I do want to enable SRV record, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. Down below, for authentication, we do have to authenticate, and we'll be using a username and password combination. Right here, we have to provide that username and password we created in that little setup wizard when we clicked that connect button. So for me, I had called it task app, and then I set up my password, and this is the one that I told you need to remember for this step. Down below that, we have our authentication database. We're going to leave that as is. We have other information which we don't need. SSL, that's already set up correctly for Atlas deployment. SSH tunnel, none, and then down below that, our favorite name. So for this one, I could pick something like production MongoDB database. I can create that as a favorite, and then we can go ahead and connect to that as well. Now, when we connect, we're not going to see our data because we haven't created any collections and we haven't inserted any documents, but we will get to that in the next video when we finalize the deployment. For the moment, the goal is to just make sure we can actually connect to the database from outside of the website. So whether it's from the Compass application or from our project in Visual Studio Code. So here we can see that we were able to connect successfully. Now there is no Task Manager API database showing up, but that'll change when we actually connect and create the database from our application in the next lesson. So now we can go ahead and disconnect from this as well, and we can use MongoDB Compass in the future to manage our data either locally or in production. So over here on the left-hand side, that means we no longer need Robo3T. We can go ahead and close that program down. Now there are two quick things I want to talk about. First up, SRV records. Those come from the DNS world. They are not specific to MongoDB, MongoDB Atlas, or Compass in any way whatsoever. That is what maps this right here, the host, to the correct IP and port. And down below, if you forgot the password you created for your user, you can use the web interface to actually find it. So over here, we're actually done with this whole little modal showing us how we can connect. We can close that down and start to manage our data from the interface. What we're going to do is head over to security, and here we have MongoDB users. This contains the user we created in that little setup modal. We also have IP whitelist over here. This is where the IP we set up now lives. Let's go ahead and go back to MongoDB users. We'll go to edit. We'll go to edit password, then you can click show to view the password that you created for your user. You can then use that when connecting from MongoDB Compass if you forgot what the password was. So now that we have this in place, we have a production-ready database, and we're able to connect to it from a GUI tool. In the next lesson, we're going to focus on getting everything set up on Heroku. We need to create the Heroku application, we need to figure out how to set up environment variables on Heroku, and then we need to deploy our code. I'm really excited to get to that, so let's go ahead and jump right in to the next lesson.